Hi everyone, so here we are for our third set of videos. There'll probably be at least, excuse me, 2 more of these. So we are going to pick up where we left off last night, and that is with chapter 8. Chapter 8 is called 3 Words. And in this chapter, what we are dealing with is Lauren's gotten away from Brian, as we discussed last time. And she's made it to this farmer friend's house. She is working on recovery because, like I said, it was pretty traumatizing to get there to Brian's. Away from Brian to this farmer's house. At that house, she meets a couple of people named Jack and Rosa. And I mentioned Rosa last time. She's the one who is a herbalist, kind of like Lauren's father had been. And she's really helping guide Lauren, not only through the unplanned pregnancy, but also through Lauren's journey to understand what happened with Brian, as well as how she is able to process her emotional state. So that's one of the issues that Lauren is dealing with, and we talked about last time, is that she's this incredibly sensitive person, but because of her rape and other things that have happened, she just really needs to shut things out. And now she's escaped from Brian, and she's recovering, and she's starting to go through this process of self-reflection and whether or not she can handle processing more emotions and things like that. So Rose is working with her on that. Let's see. So I'm going to start out pretty quickly with a reading tonight. Let's see. Where did I start this? Okay, so it's going to be a relatively short reading. So what we've got here is, so it's a fairly short chapter. There's not a lot of political content. We already discussed some of the abortion politics last night. So tonight it's mostly going to be just talking about, or with this chapter, it's mostly just talking about kind of Lauren's personal journey. So like I said, there's not a lot of politics. So we're going to pick up with a little bit on her reflecting on her time there with these folks, and I'm going to kind of start with as she's getting ready to leave. Adjust my camera a little bit. Looks like it's, oh, sorry about that for the sound. Okay. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Okay, so here we go. Okay, I'm going to unplug that because I think the sound is just fine with just the iPhone. Okay, so here we go. As she was preparing to leave, Lauren looked around and took in the shelves surrounding the little bed she'd called home. She wanted to remember every inch of it, since she'd emerged from more than one coma while lying there. She packed a picture that Gloria had drawn and put her shoes back on, now liberated from their mud sheath. Lauren wasn't ready to go, but she was ready as she could be to see her family again. Rosa gave Lauren an embroidered cotton scarf to protect her wound, with delicate flowers adorning the end. Lauren was tying it on and admiring Rosa's handiwork when she saw herself in the mirror. Her eyes weren't happy, but they weren't sad. Jack decided for cover that they'd transport a load of straw to town along with some chickens. Lauren would bawl in the middle of the bale so no one would see her. The family gathered in the driveway in the shadow of the scorched maple. As they were ready for her to climb in the truck, Lauren couldn't stop the sentiments from overtaking her. She would miss them so much. I can never repay you for what you did for me. Rosa teared up and grinned. Don't worry, honey. You're going to pay it forward. Your journey is just beginning. I don't know why you think so much of me. Because I see the greatness that you can't yet. Lauren just shook her head. Yeah, right, she thought. Gloria wrapped her arms tight around Lauren. I love you, she said. Lauren hadn't heard those words since her dad was still alive. Brian never said them. Lauren steadied herself and said those 3 words that had the capacity to change the world. She embarrassed herself, though, as the words felt foreign in her mouth. She gave Gloria a quick kiss on the head before she climbed inside the truck. So that's just kind of, a little bit about Lauren. One of the things that Lauren's discovering in this chapter is that her own family hadn't been particularly warm or loving in many ways, and so she's kind of struggling with that. Oh my goodness, you guys, this technology is not working for me tonight. For some reason, my thing keeps going down. I don't know what's going on with it. In any event, so she's, as she sees Gloria interacting with her children, she's realizing that there's other ways to be in the world. There's other ways that mothers can interact with their children, and that perhaps part of what was missing in Lauren's life wasn't just what had happened with the attack, that maybe also there was some deficit of warmth and emotion in her family life. So that's why the words feel foreign. Obviously Brian hadn't been loving to her, so it's a little challenging for her to start to process through that again. So that chapter's pretty quick, so we're just racing through that one. And then we're moving on to chapter 9, Peeling Away. So with chapter 9, so much of this chapter is written from Lauren's sister's perspective, Rachel. And Rachel and Lauren are about 20 years apart. So when Rachel was just getting to go, becoming an adult, getting ready to go off to college, that's when the first time that, that's when Lauren was born. And so they're really sisters of two generations. And I wanted to do that for a couple reasons. One, I wanted to kind of play with the idea of how even within the same family, siblings can be raised very differently, how they can experience life very differently. And that I think, providing the two different women's very different age perspectives allowed me to play with some kind of those generational differences between them. So that's why we have Rachel being so much older. And again, on the website, innerbones.com, there's another story that's a background of Rachel, so if anyone's interested in more of that. So we've got Lauren's finally reuniting with her sister after all this time, and her sister has a son, and this is not a biological son, it's an adopted son. So his name is Ben, and he was adopted in kind of an odd or an unusual way. This chapter gets back into politics again a little bit, in the sense that one of the things I was trying to play with Ben and his adoption and his mixed race was kind of extending out some of the policies that are happening right now with the Trump administration in terms of how they're handling migrant children. So, again, with this novel, almost everything that was in it was, even these kind of horrible stories and things, they were derived from somewhere. So with the migrant, or with this situation with Ben, we're seeing that even right now, for instance, this has happened in a few airports and things, as people who are not white are coming back into the country, or if they're just swept up in a raid or something like that, if they don't have proof of citizenship, some of these folks are ending up in these same migrant detention facilities with the people who are not citizens. And there's been at least one person who was in there, I'm pretty sure a man who was in there for at least a few months before he was able to get freed. So in this world I've created, this policy has been extended and essentially sweeping up anyone who is not white, who cannot prove citizenship on the spot. And we have seen this type of harassment of people throughout different countries and different time periods, oppressive regimes requiring their citizens to have paperwork and things like that that they carry with them. So this didn't seem super far-fetched to consider the concept that in this horrible, nightmarish post-apocalyptic world, that the policy could just be extended to sweep up more and more people all the time. So I have created a fictitious Department of Children and Families, and that is a department that was created specifically for these migrant detention facilities. I like to give it the ironic name, the Department of Children and Families. Obviously, supporting children or families would not really be the goal of this department. But they created this in my world with the ostensible explanation that they were trying to prevent children from, ending up they were trying to prevent vulnerable children from ending up on the streets. Because as you see with almost every repressive regime throughout history, that there's a term that was coined in the book 1984 that I think is very appropriate for the Trump administration, and that's called doublespeak. So with doublespeak, what the concept is that you're saying one thing, but it really has a different meaning. And so it's kind of like with the Department of Children and Families. So it's, purportedly for protecting children, but in fact, it's actually oppressing them. So I wanted to play with that because the children in the migrant, not just the children, the people in the migrant detention facilities is, to me, probably one of our biggest moral failings right now as a country. We talk about them as if, these people shouldn't have come to this country and all of this and that. And I suppose that's a separate question that we need to address as a nation. But right now, what we are doing with these mass detention facilities is profoundly immoral. And in my novel, again, an extrapolation of trends, these warehouse facilities are created, by for-profit entities. And that is, in fact, true. So, the folks who are getting the contracts to build these facilities and to run these facilities, first of all, it's very shady. We don't know a lot about which companies have them. We don't know a lot about where the children are housed. We don't know a lot about what the conditions are while they're in there. The administration is being very, very sketchy, not even allowing Congress people to inspect them in some cases. And one of the things that concerns me about these, well, there's so many things that concern me, but one of the things that concerns me is there's not a lot of plans for what to do with these folks. So in many instances, these children are being housed indefinitely until they are, aging out, and then they're just deported back to the country where they're from. So basically, these private contractors, which are, we don't know a lot about them, but what we do know is that many of them are the same folks who are running privately run prisons. So, they're making a great deal of money off of these people and housing these people. Some of the investigative journalism that's been done around it has shown, dismal conditions, to say the least, and, entirely inadequate staffing and, food, everything. So, I think that's something that we're going to need to continue to grapple with as a nation, what our moral responsibility is for these people. And to just extend it out a little further, I didn't really talk much about this in the novel, but to me and others, these migrant detention facilities can be are very analogous to a concentration camp. And I have a number, some of on the right would say that's hyperbole. They're nothing like a concentration camp, for example. But I think the ways in which they are similar need to be addressed. So, in Nazi Germany, the undesirables were obviously, undesirables, quote unquote, obviously not my view, were sent to these concentration camps. In those Hitler concentration camps, they had an active campaign of murdering them, right? We do not have an active campaign of murdering them in terms of having ovens, and so or gas chambers. And so I think that's where some folks would say, well, no, we can't compare these two. But, let's extend that out a little further, because, what were most of the ways that the people in the concentration camps died? It was not through the gas chambers. It was not through, being killed in that way. It was through disease. It was through being overworked, through medical experimentation, things of this nature. And if we are not treating illnesses of the folks who are in these camps, if we are not doing anything about coronavirus spreading in these camps, which there's some evidence that it's spreading quite wildly in them, if we are not feeding people adequately, if we are separating children from their families such that, if we talked last night about the early childhood trauma, one of the things that haunts me the most about these camps is that those children who are being put in them will likely be fundamentally changed for the rest of their lives. So we're creating, children who will have quite likely have profound mental illness as a result of being housed in these camps. And then the most upsetting thing, perhaps, to come to light recently was that there was actually a gynecologist in one of the camps, I think it was just one, who was performing forced hysterectomies on the women in the camp. And so they weren't being asked, they weren't given permission, they weren't told what was happening, they were just simply shuttled into a medical lab or doctor's office or what have you, and given a hysterectomy. And some of the evidence around that is that he was the doctor was performing these, was doing funny things in addition to that. I don't know a lot about that, but clearly that is a profound moral atrocity. Another thing, hearkening back to eugenics, and that was of course part of the whole Nazi thing too, was eugenics. Then in addition to that, I think something that we're not really understanding very well is the amount of sexual exploitation that's happening in these camps or these detention facilities, that whenever you have a situation where there are vulnerable children or vulnerable women and other folks who are trapped in a facility or are in a situation where there's almost no oversight, the capacity for sexual exploitation is going to be extremely high, just right there. And we are seeing reports trickling out of profound sexual abuse that's happening among the children and with staff on, affecting the children, and with, women for sure, including some of the guards demanding sexual favors for, basic livelihood. And we're also seeing, folks with different gender identities being exploited even further. And so, these migrant detention facilities are so close to concentration camps that I don't think we can continue to pretend like that's not what we're doing as a country. And the fact that so many people are willing to dismiss what's happening as, well, those parents shouldn't have brought those kids here, or they shouldn't have come here, is just really victim blaming. So, I think we also don't really, as Americans, comprehend how our country's policies have affected these other countries where folks are coming here from. So, for example, the war on drugs has really helped destabilize a lot of Latin America with, supporting military regimes, supporting brutal repression. And then let's face it, America, we're using a lot of these drugs. So, the drug mafia in South and Central America is really very strong. And they're very exploitive of the people of these countries, and very violent, and they force young children into their gangs. They force people to commit brutal atrocities so that they stay in the gangs. There's extortion. There's all the things that come with mafia. All these things are happening in these countries, and we as Americans also need to accept some moral responsibility for that. We're purchasing these drugs that is fueling this drug war and these mafia situations in these countries that are so destabilizing their countries that people are coming here as a way to get away from this violence. So I guess some of these folks would say, well, they shouldn't have come. I'd like you to ask yourself, if you and your children are in a situation where there's somebody threatening you, where your child is being told that they have to kill somebody and join the gang, I'm not sure that you would be all cool with just hanging out. Probably you would think, I need to get away and I need to get myself and my children somewhere safe. And if you don't know, you're going to do anything you can to get to safety, right? So many of these people have been walking thousands of miles to get to the U.S. border. Our laws say that anyone who has been under a threat of violence and exploitation in their home countries has the legal right to apply for asylum. But what the Trump administration has done, and we're seeing this over and over again, the president really doesn't care about the law. And if you have an attorney general with so much power like Bill Barr, that's how the law gets enforced. And so, if you have a president who doesn't care about the law, an attorney general who doesn't care about the law, obviously no sense of morality, there's no one to enforce the fact that this is United States law. So it's just not getting followed. So they're reducing funding for migration courts so that there's an even greater backlog of people who have applied legitimately. So they always say, they need to apply for citizenship just like, other people would, or they need to apply to get here. They shouldn't be trying to jump ahead of the line or sneak in or what have you. Okay, let's just say with that for a moment. But then we need to have an apparatus for people who are coming here to apply for that asylum. And we're shutting down the capacity for them to even apply. So let's just say you're a new migrant, you've just gotten to the border, you're going to do it all legitimately, right? You're going to go and you're going to seek asylum and you're going to do the paperwork and everything. Okay. So if you do that, what they do is they give you a phone number, I believe it is, to call, and then, something to this effect, and then just go away. And then what we're finding, or what I've been hearing reports of, is that some of the phone numbers they're giving are not even real phone numbers, and they're not. There's not any way for these folks to follow up. So even if they have come and legitimately tried to apply, there's no way for them to actually apply. So that's one way that they're shutting things down. Another way is, the backlog with the court. So even if someone's able to make it through, if you only have a few immigration judges, you don't have enough just physical structure to be able to process people's applications. The other thing they're finding is that migrants are coming in, particularly some of these migrant children who don't speak English, and they're not given, there's no lawyer, there's no translator, there's nothing. So you have 6-year-olds representing themselves in court alone. And the president wants to say all the time, like, well, they shouldn't have come, circling back to that, they shouldn't have come here, and that there's coyotes and drug gangs and other people bringing them. In some instances, for sure, that's what's happening. But the vast majority of these people are coming in just on their own to escape the violence in their home countries. So then, it's very easy to dismiss it as what the president is trying to do is say that these people have no moral standing, or these children have no moral standing because they've been brought in by gangs. And I guess I don't give a fuck if it's a 6-year-old child and they've been brought by a gang, or they've been brought by their parents, or they've been brought by whatever. There's still a 6-year-old child sitting in court by themselves, being represented by no one, without even the capacity to speak the language. So that's another way, that things are not going the way they're supposed to. Even the immigration judges themselves are asking, can we have more judges? We're having such a backlog. I think they have like 3 minutes per case, something to this effect. So we're seeing that, and people are getting really, really rich off these detention facilities. And that's, I think, what makes me more angry than anything is, one of the ways I think both the right and the left agree is that all of us, or just Americans, fuck right and left, we're pissed about the exploitation by the 1%, right? Pretty much all of us can agree on that. I speak to my Trump friends, and they're talking about corporate wealth and the rich and elite, exploiting everybody, whatnot. But we see different people at the helm of that, and different ways that's we're not in agreement as to who's doing the exploiting necessarily, and who's at the head of that. When it trickles down just a little bit. But at the very, very top, most of us can agree that corporations don't have a lot of moral standing or interest in morality, and that the folks who are running those, particularly these private prisons and private detention facilities, they make the most money by denying help to the people who are needing help, right? So I think I don't know, I'm kind of diverging a little bit. I'm just very frustrated at how rich people are getting off of the ruination of people's lives. And I don't think that almost any American, if they really knew what was happening, would go along with that. I don't care what your political perspective is. I don't think that would be something that most people would agree is acceptable for our country to be doing to other people. So I wanted to highlight these migrant detention facilities with Ben's case. And then I want to step back for just a second and talk a little bit about something that I was worried about when I was writing this novel, and with Ben's character, and that is something that is common in literature and movies and things like that, and that is the white savior plot. So we've got, Lauren and Rachel are both white women, and they've got this non-white child. And, Rachel has kind of saved Ben, for all intents and purposes. And I was concerned a lot, as the plot was developing, that would be a source of criticism of my novel. Because, it's kind of bullshit. A lot of, these stories are... the poor brown person or the black person is, kind of not capable of handling their own lives, and they need the white person to step in and fix everything. And I was really hesitant to, or really struggling with how to create Ben's character in a way that did not present Ben as being just this complete nothing that needed white people to come in and fix it all. So in the story of Ben's being saved as an infant, I don't identify the race of the folks who were present to save him, so we can assume whoever was there. Also, I guess I felt like since Ben was an infant, he was vulnerable, and there was, he needed someone to save him. And in my novel, I decided to create the plot around white characters because I am a white woman, and I did not feel as if I could give justice to the experience of a minority person, as the main character. Perhaps I could have, but I felt like I didn't want to put myself in the position for trying to figure out how to create that experience in a way that was authentic and real, and not insulting in ways that I would probably inevitably get things wrong, because that isn't my experience. So that's why I chose to do a white woman as a main character. Now, my son, my 20-something son, read the book, and he's like, I don't like all these white people in this book, sorry. But that's why, is because I didn't feel I could give an authentic reading of a non-white character as my main character. So, but then with Ben, as being this non-white child, I did try to give him agency through the novel. We were ending with Ben's life and kind of bringing some things full circle. And so I'm trying to avoid the white savior shit as much as I can. But I really wanted Ben's character in there to one, bring in some stuff around adoption, because, that's been my life for 20 years is adoption. And so there were a few things about adoption that I wanted to say that I kind of get to at the end of the novel. But I also, especially around this migrant detention facilities, I felt that his character could really highlight and bring a personal touch to the fact that yes, these detention facilities are real. And then if we extrapolate out what is already happening with, non-white citizens being swept up in the detention facilities, it was not unreasonable to think that in the future this would be happening more and more frequently. Okay, so let's see. So in this chapter, we also have Rachel finally confronting Lauren about her complicity. So, Lauren is the person we've talked about, before. She really stayed out of politics. She didn't really, want to be involved. She figured, kind of both sides were fairly equal bullshit. Even though her father and Rachel kept trying to get her to understand, this is not just politics as usual. This is not a both sides situation. We need to have some more complexity with, how we're looking at the president and how we're looking at his policies. But Lauren just couldn't really do any of that, for all of her own personal reasons. So she gets to Rachel's house and, admits that she'd been, swept up in this, Defenders of the Homeland, and, that, she was putting Rachel and Rachel's son Ben at risk by having had this connection with the militia. And so Rachel's just kind of done with her at this point. Rachel's just not done with her, but she's just kind of tired of Lauren always hiding behind this, inability to deal with what's really happening. So Rachel finally confronts her with that. And, Lauren is needing to come to terms with it because, of course, she's finally realizing that, yeah, she was complicit, and that she should have done more to speak out. And, here she didn't. Now she's finally understanding why her sister's upset. She's finally understanding, a bit more about the risk that she'd put Ben through. So I wanted to read just a little bit about... did I cover everything? Oh, yeah. So also the other thing about Rachel is that, she had been, for a long time, really understanding the political situation in the country and following what was going on. And so she really brought together a plan for escaping. But there have been a couple of things that have been holding her back. One, she was concerned about Lauren, but primarily it was their mother. So their mother is elderly. She has dementia. She's in a nursing home. And Rachel just couldn't figure out how she could leave their mother behind. So we're going to get to that in the next chapter. But I'm going to read a little bit from this chapter about the Department of Children and Families. Like I said, that fictitious entity that was created. The president had created the Department of Children and Families for the alleged purpose of saving the many orphan children who were suffering. But the executive order was really intended to frighten people to fill the big privately owned warehouse detention facilities that were built by the president's friends and donors. DCF would take any non-white looking kids it could round up, regardless of their actual citizenship, and hand them over to central processing facilities. From there, the kids ended up indefinitely in warehouse prisons unless they were lucky enough that the right bribe got into the right hands to buy their freedom. A good many were also dumped alone on the streets of some poor country America bullied into taking them. The, quote, suitable ones were taken to homes where they were promised an education and a good life as missionaries. Because again, in this world, Christian fundamentalist extremists have taken over, and so they have a lot of influence in the way the country's run. They'd learned the gospel and spread it across the land to earn their keep. Some people would take in these children and take care of them, but that wasn't the fate met by most, unless you can call scrubbing floors and sucking old men's cocks spreading the good word. Rachel had been friends with the social worker for years, the social worker who helped save Ben. They'd gone to a few protests together and written postcards to politicians and such back in the days before that became illegal. The worker showed up at Rachel's house unannounced. The baby was so teensy and adorable and so vulnerable that Rachel couldn't say no. She had never imagined that she would become a mom at her age and had been okay with that. Cuddling that sleeping baby made her wonder how she could live another moment without him, though. Her eyes filled as she said, "I'm going to name him Ben." Every once in a while I still get emotional for my book. I don't know what the deal. Okay, you'd think I'd be totally oblivious to it all by now, but I'm still not. Okay, the social worker knew someone who could forge a new birth certificate, and just like that, he became Rachel's son. Before she left, the social worker pressed a small framed picture into Rachel's hands. "Keep this. He'll want it someday." So the picture is going to come back in toward the end of the novel. Okay, so let's see. Let's go on to chapter 10 now, bobby pins. Just recently, I need to get that up on my website tonight, but we got the Spanish version of this novel finished, and my translator was talking about how hard it was for him to find a word to translate bobby pins. He didn't know what that was. I thought that was cute. Okay, so in chapter 10, we're seeing the progression of Lauren coming to terms with herself, both with her complicity and her relationship with herself, her relationship with Brian, kind of how she's allowed herself to be in these vulnerable relationships and to be exploited. So let's see. So she's doing a lot more internal work around that, or struggling, with her emotional state. Also, the sisters are preparing to pull together the plan to leave. But as they're preparing to leave, they get notice in a form of a text message that the militias are on the move, and that there are going to be roadblocks set up. So the sisters start then we have a little role reversal. So Lauren then is kind of stable, and Rachel's freaking out, and Lauren kind of helps Rachel work through this, and they come up with a plan. I don't want to give too many spoilers, but I felt like a super fun plan for them to evade these checkpoints. So they follow through on getting themselves together for this plan. Okay, we're going so much faster tonight, guys. So I'm gonna read a little bit from chapter 10. I'm gonna start at the beginning of the chapter. The house was silent, but Lauren's head was a torrent of screams. Sleep eluded her as she tried to build her courage for the journey's end. She kept her tears at bay as anger with herself was papering over the sadness. The chronicle of Ben's adoption from the night before was seared into her mind. Lauren finally understood the gravity of her choices. She thought back to a time before the president's second election when Rachel had gotten herself worked up about the child detentions at the border. They were at their folks' house for supper. Lauren kept saying, "The parents shouldn't have brought them here. It's their fault if the kids suffer. Not my problem." Lauren could still see the disgust on Rachel's face. At the time, Lauren believed that her sister was overreacting. Rachel slammed her glass down. "You're trying not to take sides in a world where morality demands it, Lauren. Can't you see what the president is doing to this country? Why won't you do anything?" Lauren answered, "Because I'm only responsible for myself, Rachel. These other people need to take responsibility for their own lives." Looking back, the truth was that Lauren could not stand to see the pictures of the children detained at the border. She couldn't hear their stories of what they'd were going through, and what the government was about to put them through. As with so many things, it wasn't that Lauren didn't care. She cared too much and was overwhelmed. Tuning it out and blaming the parents was vastly easier than coming to terms with what was happening. Now she was mortified with herself. No wonder Rachel was angry. Lauren heard the door creak open, as if someone was sneaking. A bolt of fear coursed through her as she popped up, ready for Brian, ready for a fight. What she saw was a heavy-hearted little boy staring at her. "Ben, you scared me so much. Do you need something?" "No, I was just hoping you were gone." He turned and left without a word. The look in his eyes had been eviscerating. Lauren felt her mind start spinning into the emotional chaos of another episode. Rosa had helped her understand that she was powerless to stop it, but she could learn to control it. At this moment, though, there was no control. There was no stopping the ache. But Lauren was less scared than she'd been. She knew that the feelings wouldn't break her. Rosa had said, "Your tears are how you rebuild yourself, Lauren. Let the feelings out. Let them come because your job is to flush out the agony. You're holding in. You will never heal if you keep it inside." Lauren let herself cry until the pillow was damp and her torture eased. So it's a little bit about Lauren, kind of her coming to terms with herself emotionally. So, that's a big part of the story of the book is, what Lauren's journey is going from, someone who was presenting as pretty cold to becoming a more emotionally well-rounded and more capable person. So let's see. Yes, we are going so fast. Oh my goodness. Okay, so let's jump to chapter 11. Slip away. So this chapter was something, it was one of the first chapters I wrote and then became chapter 11. But I wanted to do with this chapter was a couple things. So the sisters, they've got their plan. They're getting ready to leave. But the mother has dementia. Anne is her name. And she's in a nursing home. And she's been there for quite a few years. So, you kind of get the impression when she first went into the nursing home that it, wasn't too bad. Obviously not great. No nursing home is great. But, was stable enough. But then over the course of her time, over the course of the years being there, things are getting worse and worse. So, in this world I've created, one of the things we need to acknowledge is with climate change, that's going to be affecting the elderly disproportionate to others. So I wanted to bring that into light, because what we're seeing, especially in some countries, like I'm thinking of India, for example, with one of the horrific heat waves that happened recently, elderly people are often, they're less able to take care of themselves. They're more fragile. It takes less to push them over the edge, into death than it does for a younger and healthier person, right? So we're going to see with climate change and how the planet is heating up, storms are getting worse. Just literally the heat itself is going to be a pretty significant threat to a lot of folks, elderly and young and other people who have, different problems, health problems. So I wanted to bring in the concept of the nursing homes and how that would be affected in the future. So Anne's in the nursing home. Lauren has struggled with, she doesn't have the greatest relationship with her mother. She really never has. So it's not just the rape with that relationship. It's also the fact that the mother is kind of cold and kind of distant. And Lauren, although she can present as cold and distant, really is a very emotionally warm person and needs that connection. And when she didn't get it from her mom, it just kind of created some difficulty for the two of them connecting. So Lauren doesn't go and see her mom a lot. Rachel's been more the one taking care of her. And Rachel had been seeing things getting worse. But then, one of the things, when you have systems that are vulnerable and stressed, that they can go from bad to worse very, very quickly. So that's one of the things I wanted to paint in this nursing home chapter, was that, things weren't great, but then you had a couple things that happened and it just completely deteriorated the situation. So the things that have happened in the nursing home, the power is not consistently operating, which makes sense in many, many countries in the world. Power is not super consistent. You'll have it for a while, you'll not have it, depending on difficulties with lines, finding workers, things like that. So that I didn't think that was a stretch to think that in the future that power could be touch and go. So the air conditioning was out in the nursing home. Also, the water lines were somehow contaminated. So thinking to Flint, Michigan, for example, what we saw, and actually not only Flint. Flint got the most coverage, but there have been other cities too that have contaminated water. After some government work on the water lines or what have you, then their water supply becomes contaminated. And so that's essentially what happens with the water lines coming into the nursing home, is that there's some sort of contamination. So the elderly people are hot, they're not getting enough liquid. So, and then a heat wave comes through, and it's just, the perfect storm for bringing people down. The other thing is that I'm tying in with this is that I don't think as Americans really want to acknowledge how many of the jobs that essential jobs are being performed by immigrants. Often undocumented, but not only undocumented. For example, nursing homes is a very, very common profession that is being primarily, or not primarily, but often staffed by non-white people, particularly from the immigration community. So what we're already seeing with the crackdown on immigration is that employers are having a harder and harder time filling some of these jobs. Dishwashers, servers, things like that, basic healthcare, childcare, elderly care, things like that. So in this world, staffing has gotten less and less. We no longer have Social Security and Medicare and things like that are funding the care of the elderly. And we've heard the president already talking about. He says at his rallies and things like that, like, I'm not touching your Social Security and Medicare, but his policies are doing things that are undermining Social Security and Medicare's capacity to function. So he can, again, double speak. We'll jump back to that, 1984 word in the book 1984. It's double speak. He's saying, I want to protect your Social Security and Medicare, but what he's doing is undermining them. So extrapolating out trends, Social Security and Medicare are no longer viable options for supporting people in this world. And then we've got this perfect storm with all these awful things that go down. So Rachel and Lauren get to the nursing home, to collect their mother, because even though she has dementia, they're not going to leave her behind and just take off. So they get to the nursing home, and here is what they find. So let's jump into that. So actually, I'm starting it just as they're leaving the house. And my tripod is being weird tonight, so I'm sorry about the camera jumping around a little bit. If it stays where it's at, I'm just going to leave it because I've adjusted so many times. Try to do better for tomorrow. Okay. So they're just leaving Rachel's house. They've got this plan for how to evade the checkpoints and things like that. So Lauren grabbed the Bible off Rachel's shelf and wedged it between the windshield and the dash to keep it from sliding around. Lauren considered it both a prop and her guiding light. Rachel pulled out of her garage and started down the potholed street toward the nursing home where their mother had been living for the past 5 years. Skeletal remains of trees long perished lined the streets. They rolled past the restaurant where their parents had first met. One side of the building was scorched and the windows were broken. Lauren grimaced. She was worried about seeing her mother again. It had been a few months, and Anne hadn't recognized her the last time. It had so pierced Lauren's fragile spirit that she hadn't gone since. Lauren knew that Rachel judged her for that too. As Rachel pulled into the squat one-story building, Lauren scanned for wayfarers. There were only 2 other cars there, one of which was a tree growing up through its trunk with weeds in every crevice. The door to the building was propped open, and the sisters exchanged a glance of distress. Lauren said, I don't want Ben to have to go in there. Just let me do it, okay? You've done so much for her already. Lauren decided that she would fight her omnipresent guilt with action. Are you sure you can handle it? You've been through a lot. To be honest, I'm not sure. But I think I should try. Okay, but come and get me if you need anything, Rachel answered. As Lauren approached the door, a sickly, rotten smell billowed out. She steeled herself for what she might find inside. There was no one at the front desk, but several residents were sitting in wheelchairs stripped down to their dirty t-shirts and underwear. They didn't look up. Others were incoherently milling about the common room. The place was sweltering. Lauren covered her nose with her hand. "Hello? Is there anyone here in charge?" She called out. No one answered. Lauren continued down the hall toward her mother's room with a sense of foreboding. Glancing indoors, as she walked, residents were lying in their beds listless. When she arrived at Anne's room, Lauren knew that something was wrong immediately. The sheets were gone from the bed and there was no sign of her mother. She wondered with a rising panic what that smell was. Lauren rushed towards a voice down the hall. She came across a short woman with coal-colored hair standing over a shell of a shockingly pale old white woman. The stubby woman was wearing a soiled nurse's uniform with the name Biche on the pin. The nurse said in a thick Vietnamese accent, "There you go, Mrs. Anthony. You'll be a lot more comfortable now." The room was disheveled with soiled laundry and food containers. Beach looked up surprised to see Lauren. "Hello there. Who are you here for?" Okay, and then we continue with them through the, through the discovery of, I'll go ahead and give a spoiler, Anne has passed away. So they don't end up bringing Anne along with them on the journey. That's how kind of that chapter concludes, and then they leave Rochester to finally get away from Brian and the Defenders. So, was that chapter 11? Did I finish tonight? My gosh, you guys. This was so short. I did. I finished chapter 11. So I think I'm going to conclude there because the last couple of them were so darn long. And so I think I'm going to pick up with chapter 12 tomorrow. And if it goes this fast, I might zip through a few more chapters. I'm going to take a break for Halloween. But hopefully, we'll do one tomorrow night and then again on Sunday. And then I think Sunday should be the concluding episode of these little talks I've been doing. So I'll look at your comments afterward, as I always do. And thank you for joining me tonight. And you folks have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.